chess friends, I hope you are doing well. Today, I have a new chess engine called Redfish. It played against me in the TSEC Chess Championship, and this game is very intense and crazy. I pushed forward my pawns to launch an attack on the king side. I will share the chess tactics and strategies employed in this game, so let's get started without wasting any time. I started the game with e4, Redfish responded with c5, knight f3 and d6. Did he take my name, or is he really a Redfish? As usual, I played d4, aiming for the open variation of the Sicilian, and Redfish could go with g6 or knight c6. Alternatively, other possible moves are certainly possible, so we have knight f6 and a6 from black, deploying the convariation to prevent any piece entry on the b5 square. That's crazy, isn't it? I replied to Redfish, saying, you might be a Redfish by your anger or revenge, but I am more powerful and cold than you. Let me freeze you at 0 degrees Celsius by playing bishop e2. From there, I could potentially push my pawn forward and bring my queen out to play a long castle. Therefore, I planned to push my kingside pawns to launch a heavy attack. How can you protect against that? Redfish played e6, and after I castled, bishop e7 came onto the board. Rather than considering a4 or bishop e3, I chose a different approach that has only been played a few times in the Lichess database, f4. Additionally, this move was also played by Mikhail Tal, Anand, and many other chess grandmasters, where e5 and d5 are very bad-looking moves. Let me illustrate what will happen if you dare to consider e5. I will bring my knight to the f5 square, go, my knight, attack the black king, and show your real power. After capture and recapture, the knight comes to c6, I will push my pawn to g4, threatening g5, this creates a very crazy and aggressive pawn structure in your territory. Alright, after capture, I will slide my king. Instead of considering h6 to protect the g5 square, many foolish and ignorant players might play queen c7, to play a long castle. I am getting ready from this open file. I will strike by playing g5, kicking out the knight, and the knight has to retreat with no good squares to go to. After that, my knight will come to the d5 square. That's my strategy. Your knight has to move back, and my knight can easily come into the center and into your territory. That's the difference between a gangster and a novice gangster. If the queen goes to a5 instead of queen d8, I will just capture the pawn. You will notice that after knight takes e7, my bishop and queen will together attack the pawn on d6. That's why black might consider playing a long castle because the bishop is well protected by the knight, but that is also a rubbish move. It illustrates the philosophy of life that humans often ignore their problems and escape from them. But the problem gets bigger and bigger, and with time, you get pressurized and your mind gets lazy, then you face the problems and consequences. That's why I will play b4, making the problem bigger and bigger. The knight cannot capture the pawn because of this, and as the queen moves, rook b1 will come to protect the pawn. You can see that your queen is just hopeless on the queen side. The queen cannot escape. After that, I will play knight c3 to attack the queen. Many chess players might think of considering queen takes a2 as suggested by a grandmaster, but you all are nothing to me. Like an insect is nothing to a rat is nothing to a cat is nothing against a dog, and a dog is nothing against a tiger. That's the way you all are nothing against me. I will consider b5, attacking the knight, and after capture, I will consider rook a1, gaining the file. After knight takes e7, you capture back, and queen takes d6, making queen b6 badly checked. Rook to a8 is almost unstoppable. You will lose the game, and the game will be in my favor. So going back to the position, we discovered that playing e5 is a very bad choice. You will face the consequences after 10 to 15 moves. I know humans cannot analyze 10 to 15 moves ahead, but you need to understand the key ideas and the main strategies to understand the position. That's the way you will be more accurate and become a strong chess player. Believe me, that's the way. After a few moves, we just have king h1, where I will bring my queen and rook onto the board to get to the king side. That's the strategy. After the queen moves to a4 and after a couple of moves, we have rook e8, and bishop f3. So far, so good. The center is just concrete and very strong, with black protecting the 5th rank with his pawns. Redfish just played rook b8, making its eyes red with anger. wanting to expose the position, but it should keep in mind that the b5 square is well protected, so after the queen moves, the knight here, and b6 happens on the board. Can you guess what I played in this position? Think a little bit and try to guess. The move is g4, that's a very crucial and amazing move, making a big pawn structure on the king side along the center. I am going to consider g5 and h4 as per the situation because the center and queenside pawn structures are completely locked. This is why you cannot play e5, which is a vulnerable move because I can push my pawn to f5 and later consider g5. That's the deficiency of your position, alright. So, let me share a motivational quotes with you. Don't hold to anger, hurt, or pain, they steal your energy and keep you from love. So, going back to the position, e5 is a very bad choice, which is why we have b2 c8 to consider b7 to launch an attack along this diagonal. That is the idea, and the black pieces are in a vulnerable state, they do not have any good occupations or good moves to consider. So, I just kicked out the knight and later played bishop g2, I have two good pawns, and many chess players might get frustrated and consider f6. But I will consider h4 to stabilize the structure. In this position, another frustrated chess player might consider playing f5, which looks good to attack the pawn in the center but is also vulnerable because it exposes the diagonal. After the pawn exchange is completed, queen d5 check will arrive on the board, and as the king moves, I will consider queen takes c6 because the queen is well protected by the bishop, and you will lose the knight, so goodbye knight. Have a sweet death kiss and a sweet next birth. Going back to the position, we didn't see f6 or f5, instead, we have bishop b7 from Red Fish because he wants to create a red carpet for the bishop. I just brought my rook to d1 and pushed my pawn to h4, creating three passed pawns. I will consider h5 followed by g6, which will break your teeth that you haven't cleaned for more than a year. We have b5 and h5 as the game progresses. And you can see that the position is almost locked. After the capture and recapture, the bishop moves back, and we just push the pawn to e5, putting pressure on the d6 pawn. At the same time, you cannot capture the pawn because your knight will be hanging. That is the deficiency of your position, which is why we just have d5 and the knight comes to d4, preventing the capture of the knight. If the knight comes to the board, you have to capture it. That's not the quality of the knight because the bishop might get the open diagonal. We have a5, making a good outpost for the knight, where the knight or the bishop can arrive on b4, and he has to prepare for c3. We have the knight moving back to f3, and because the center is very closed and my pawn structure is on the dark squares, black cannot play any passive looking moves for more than 3 times. Let me illustrate what will happen if you play any normal move like bishop b7. I will play queen f2. And your bishop is just moving back like a mad elephant shaking its head because an ant entered its ear. I will consider g6, pushing my pawn, and many chess players might consider h6 to keep the position closed, but I will just capture the pawn on f7. After that, queen g3 will come to attack. Even playing rook g8 will not solve your position. It may seem like the king is safe, but I can thunder shock you by playing queen g6 check, and as the king moves back, knight to b6 will attack the queen, leading to consequences. After knight capture, I can play knight to g5, sacrificing the knight to checkmate on the next move. After capture and recapture, white slaps black by making a discovered check with the rook. You have to block it with your bishop, and consequently, I will play bishop c5, attacking the king because your bishop moved away. As the knight blocks, I can put significant pressure by capturing the bishop on f6. Sacrificing the rook right away. Go my rook, it's time to prove who you are not just a piece, but a scrambling piece. After capturing, the king moves, and queen e7 will lead to checkmate. The game will be over midway, with the king still on e8. Going back to the position, we discovered that playing any passive moves more than twice will just lose your position because my pawns are pushed too far forward. My army has entered your territory with missiles and tanks, and you have to protect your kingside urgently. Red Fish considered g6 to protect the position, and many players might think of capturing the pawn on g6 as it promises to open the h-file. However, after queen f2 to bring the queen and rook to the h-file, it doesn't bring any advantage because the king can move up, allowing the black rook to play rook h8, minimizing my attacks and losing all my advantages. So, going back to the position, I didn't capture the pawn. Instead, I played h6, making my pawn structure more accurate and vibrant. My pawns are on dark squares, which is why your dark square bishop is very passive and does not have any opportunities to break the structure because the position is completely locked down. With a half-open file on the d file, I need to put my queen on g7 to checkmate you. That's my plan. So after the rook and queen moves, and after a couple of moves later, we have bishop e8. b3 followed by rook b4, so far so good. My pawn structure is on the dark squares, and the queen side is locked. I played rook d1, and as the rook moved back, I secured an outpost for my knight along with the bishop, which can create potential harm to your position since the kingside structure is completely locked down. After a couple of moves, when the knight moved back and the bishop moved, the knight then shifted, and the bishop went to a6, followed by the bishop returning to b5, we had pawn exchanges on the c4 square. I placed my bishop on this diagonal to create potential long-term attacks. As the knight moved back, black opened up the diagonal for the bishop. The knight can potentially come to these squares, creating an open c-file. That's so good. As the knight moved to d4, after a couple more moves, you can see that 90% of your piece mobilization is just dead. They cannot move freely on the board, becoming passive and very lazy. What should you consider in this position because almost everything is locked? Even playing knight f5 is not feasible. When the knight moves to d5, can you guess what I played in this position? I know you cannot find the best move because, remember, when the position is completely locked, you need to exchange pieces to create pawn weaknesses on your opponent's side. I captured the knight, and capturing the bishop with the pawn would lead to queen e2. As the knight moves and after capture and recapture, the queen gets exposed by the bishop, allowing me to place my knight on c6, attacking both the queen and rook simultaneously. Here, black can potentially capture the knight on the board, so after capture and recapture, he can just sacrifice the queen, getting 2 rooks for the queen, and the game could proceed like this. But in our actual game, instead of capturing with the pawn, he captured with his queen, which is also playable. Can you guess what I played in this position? The same move, because the queen might get exposed by the rook. Knight to c6, a very vulnerable move for black, attacking the rook and queen simultaneously. Where should the queen move? If the queen goes to e4, it will be a dead loss situation for you because I can capture the rook. Your rook and the knight on d7 will be under threat and will be gone from the game. Even if you dare to consider rook takes c1, it does not bring any advantages because I can consider knight takes d7. After you capture my rook, I can play knight to f6 check, ending your queen and king's love story, and the game will be in my hands. So, let me share an inspirational and pure quote with you. Be thankful for all things in life, even for the bad things. Sometimes the worst situations in life turn out to be the best things that ever happened to us. So, revisiting the position, we discovered that any queen move is not possible. Even queen to b5 is not viable. Alright, Red Fish sacrificed his queen on the c6 square. Goodbye, my queen. You played very well, and there is no need for the queen. After capture and recapture, black has 2 rooks for the queen, which is also playable. After a couple of moves, we are just doing chess dances. I didn't capture the knight because my own knight was under threat, and he would create a passed pawn. This is why after a couple of moves, I picked up the knight. Later on, my bishop moved to a7, and I could potentially place my queen on d8 or move my bishop to these squares to attack the dark square bishop. That's my strategy. After a few more moves, we just have king and rook bar dances. He is trying to make the game a draw. But I wouldn't let it be a draw because I'm Stockfish, the god of chess. In a few moves, many chess players, possibly foolish or donkey chess players, might consider playing bishop e8 to place the bishop on d6 on the next move to attack the bishop, but that is a completely vulnerable move. Let me show you why. After bishop c6 played by black and protected by the rook, your queen will be vulnerable. If the queen goes to d8, it will lose automatically after black plays rook d1, and if your queen goes to c8. Black can play bishop b5 check, winning my queen. I will lose the game and the potential win. That's how most players lose their winning games. They make a sudden blunder in their winning position, and suddenly the game becomes losable for them. So, in this position, bishop d8 is not possible. We just have queen d8 and queen capturing on a5, after a couple of moves. You can see we are just doing some chess dances because black's king position is completely paralyzed and dead lost. Black has nothing to do, he just has to move his rook and bishop, he has nothing else to do. When the queen goes to f6, you can see I just need to place my queen on g7, that's how I played in the game. After queen check, bishop blocks, and another check happens. You can see that my queen is threatening to come to f6 and later to the g7 square. That's my strategy. As the rook moves, we have f5 on the board. Capturing the pawn with the e-pawn is not viable due to e6, which creates pressure on the pawn on f7, and the game will be in my favor. Going back to the position, we have g takes f5, and I played g6. Still, you cannot capture the pawn with the f-pawn because of queen g7 checkmate. That's the reason why if you even dare to capture the pawn with your h-pawn, my king can come to g5 and later to the f5 square to checkmate the black king. That's my strategy, so the black king will face consequences. Going back to the position, we just have a rook check, and as the king moves, we have pawn capturing check because black has nothing to do. In a few moves, I promoted to a new queen, and the game was over. I won the game. I hope you enjoyed the game very much. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Wishing you all the best. With folded hands, I bow down to you.